They didn't just fire me, they erased me. 10 years, and it ended with a calendar invite labeled HR Touchpoint. No warning, no explanation. Just a cold room, a silent nod, and a pre-printed envelope. Before we dive in, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. My name's spelled wrong. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just sat there, watching two people half my age talk about restructuring like they were reading off a checklist. I knew then what they didn't. When you build the whole system from the ground up, you don't need to raise your voice to take it down. You just need to know which line to delete. My name's Mark Halstead, 47 years old. Grew up in Milwaukee, settled in Chicago, divorced once, no kids. I've spent the last decade managing IT systems in a mid-tier tech firm run by people who use words like innovation and transparency until they don't need you anymore. I'm not flashy. I don't dress in fitted suits or talk like I'm trying to sell something, but I get things done. Always have. 10 years ago, they brought me in when their network was held together with duct tape and prayer. I cleaned it up, streamlined it, made it resilient, quietly, no fanfare, just results. I'd been feeling it coming for weeks. The shift in how people looked at me. The new CTO brushing me off in meetings. The contractor they brought in just to help with cloud migration, asking more and more questions about root access. The writing was on the firewall, if you knew where to look. But when I walked into that HR meeting Monday morning, a part of me still hoped for decency. Maybe a thank you, maybe a heads up. Instead, I got Dan. Mid-30s, tech lingo fluent, MBA polished. My new boss of just 3 months, already convinced I was part of legacy overhead. He didn't even look uncomfortable. Just slid the papers over like he was handing off a menu. "Effective immediately," he said. "We appreciate your contributions, Mark." His voice was flat, like he was reading my eulogy in a boardroom language. The HR rep, Claire, I think, looked down at her notepad the whole time. Couldn't even meet my eyes. I glanced at the severance package. 2 months. After 10 years of unpaid weekends, midnight emergencies, and silently keeping their systems from burning to the ground. I asked calmly, "Who's managing admin credentials now?" Dan smiled like it was nothing. "We've transitioned those to Kevin," he said. "The contractor. Fresh out of grad school, sharp but green." I nodded. Said thank you, collected my things. But what Dan didn't know was that the credentials he transferred were just surface level. A sandbox. The real control, the deep architecture, the skeleton key, was never written down. Never shared. Only one person ever had it. Me. And I was just getting started. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked 2 blocks to a diner I used to hit for late breakfasts after server crashes. Sat in my usual booth by the window, ordered black coffee and a bacon skillet. I needed a moment to let it all settle. Not the firing, not even the insult of the severance. It was the insult to my intelligence. To think you can cut someone out of the machine they built without consequence, that takes a dangerous kind of arrogance. Dan didn't fire a position. He fired the memory of the system, the blueprint, the history. I opened my laptop. It wasn't the company-issued one. They took that, of course. No, this was mine. And like any decent sysadmin who's been through 3 full leadership turnovers, I had a mirrored offline copy of everything. Not to be vindictive, just to survive the chaos. You spend a decade in IT, you learn to expect the sudden shakeup, the forgotten login, the weekend catastrophe. I didn't keep backups to burn bridges. I kept them because no one else was paying attention. The master password lived in my head. A randomized string tied to a biometric hash that only authenticated through one buried system gateway, one I designed. They hadn't disabled it because they didn't know it existed. I never documented it, never needed to, but it still hummed in the dark, like a fuse waiting for the right spark. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat in my apartment in Rogers Park, watching the city lights blur through my window. Thought about the weekends I missed birthdays and barbecues to patch security holes. The time I caught a ransomware worm spreading at 2:17 a.m. on a Sunday and shut it down before it reached the billing servers. No one even knew. No one asked. That was the deal. I did my job in the shadows so others could pretend the system just worked. Dan wouldn't understand that. He was raised on dashboards and delegation. He didn't know what it meant to crawl through years of patch logs to find a broken dependency. He didn't see the difference between managing a system and knowing it, between resetting a password and recognizing when the architecture itself was about to rot. Kevin sure as hell didn't know. Kid was smart, maybe even brilliant someday. But he didn't know the traps I left in place to catch exactly this kind of transfer. Not malicious traps, more like deadman switches, protections. Complex systems need gatekeepers, not just users. So I opened the gateway, just to take a look. Not to touch anything. Yet. The audit logs were clean, but I noticed it immediately. Kevin had already started tweaking access protocols, consolidating scripts, deleting things he didn't recognize. That's when I felt it. Not anger, not pride. Something colder, sharper. They didn't just fire me. They handed my system to someone who didn't know how to hold it. By Thursday, Kevin had broken 3 things he didn't even realize were broken. Minor failures at first, routine reports failing to export, a permissions cascade that locked out a few internal tools. The kind of stuff that gets blamed on vendors or legacy issues. I watched it all unfold through the silent portal I'd left myself. Tucked behind a shell script, buried 2 directories deep in a sandboxed VM. It was like watching someone fumble through a dark room I'd memorized down to the creaking floorboards. I still hadn't touched anything. But I was in. Fully. Privately. Every change they made echoed back to me. Every script Kevin adjusted. Every role Dan reassigned. I saw it all. It's funny. You spend a decade in a place, you start to feel invisible, until you actually disappear. And then suddenly you see everything. The inefficiencies, the petty politics, the reckless decisions papered over by fancy slide decks. Dan had moved fast to consolidate his little empire. Promoted 2 of his buddies from a previous startup. Outsourced part of DevOps to a contractor in India. The system was fraying under the surface. They thought they were streamlining. They were setting it up to collapse. I started keeping notes, not revenge, just documentation. Every insecure process Kevin enabled. Every rollback Dan canceled because it didn't align with Q2 optics. I knew what this was building toward, and I wasn't rushing it. That's not how you burn a house down. First, you study the support beams. Then you wait for them to hang something heavy on the wrong one. Friday night, I got a call from Lena. She worked in accounting. We'd bonded years ago during a week-long server crash that tanked payroll processing. We weren't close outside of work, but we respected each other. She left me a voicemail. Hey, I know you're not here anymore, but something's wrong with the data sync. They're saying it's user error, but I've been doing this 7 years and I know what I'm looking at. Just thought you should know. I didn't call her back, but I listened to the message 3 times. That's when I realized they hadn't just cut me out. They cut out everyone who gave a damn. People like Lena, people who noticed when things went wrong. Dan wanted leaner, faster, more automated. But you can't automate intuition. You can't teach a script to feel when something's off. That night, I opened the gateway again. Not to sabotage, not yet. But I left myself a note in the system logs, buried beneath a harmless IP trace. An old trick from my early sysadmin days. Anyone who knew where to look would find it. Just 6 words. "You fired the wrong person, Dan." Not a threat, just a statement of fact. The note didn't make a sound when it landed. No alerts, no logs triggered, just a quiet line buried in the noise of 1,000 pings and background tasks. I didn't expect them to notice right away. In fact, I hoped they wouldn't, because the real damage wasn't going to come from anything I typed. It was already happening. Kevin kept pushing changes to the access structure, trying to streamline processes he didn't understand. And Dan, in all his high-speed confidence, was too distracted presenting shiny new progress decks to realize the system's internal logic was unraveling. The real irony? They thought they had locked me out. They followed the book, disabled my work credentials, changed the admin logins, reassigned tickets. But they didn't understand what master access really meant. It wasn't about logins, it was about architecture. I designed the backbone of that network, wrote it to be secure but flexible. Quietly built backdoors, not for sabotage, but for resilience. Safety nets, in case someone ever tried to rip out parts without understanding how it all held together. And now someone was doing exactly that. Over the weekend, I ran a full non-invasive integrity scan on the backup instance I kept mirrored off-site. The results were brutal. I found 27 compromised functions, 6 orphaned scripts, and 2 live vulnerabilities that could have taken down internal finance systems if triggered in the wrong order. Not malicious, just sloppy. Kevin was moving fast, patching without understanding, removing processes he thought were redundant. I could see what he was trying to do. He just didn't know what threads he was pulling on. That was the moment I stopped waiting. I didn't bring down the system. I didn't touch production servers or leak anything. What I did was redirect. A subtle reroute. I shifted their nightly task scheduler to a backup node I controlled, so I could monitor every automated job they were running. Just watch. For now. But that access, quiet and untraceable, meant that every time the system checked itself, it whispered the results to me too. I was no longer just a ghost. I was the pulse beneath their heartbeat. And then on Monday morning, it happened. I got an email to my personal account from Kevin. It was short. Just, "Hey Mark, sorry to bother you. Just wondering if you ever documented anything about the Auth Demon failover routine? Getting some weird behavior on our end. Appreciate any help." I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen, coffee going cold in my hand. He'd hit one of the old trap doors. A legacy script I wrote 8 years ago, patched 5 times, tied to a deprecated security layer. It only failed if someone bypassed it entirely. And Kevin had. They were starting to feel the edges now. And I hadn't even touched the center. Tuesday morning, the internal chat logs lit up. I wasn't supposed to see them, of course, but years ago I'd built in a silent relay that copied team activity streams to a rotating encrypted archive, meant for audits, but never actually used. I watched the panic unfold in real time. The finance team couldn't generate invoices. Automated approval systems were misrouting files, and the internal authentication layer, my old Auth Demon, was failing on random cycles, locking people out for 60-second windows before reauthorizing them again. Not long enough to shut anything down, just long enough to piss people off. Dan called it a hiccup in his all-hands Slack message. Said the team was working around the clock to resolve unexpected performance issues. I almost laughed. It wasn't a performance issue. It was a pressure test, a reminder that cutting corners cuts more than costs. It cuts control. Kevin pinged me again. "Hey Mark, sorry to bug you again. Something's broken with the payroll export. Tried to reverse the last patch, but the rollback script's failing." I didn't respond. I just watched. Because now they were standing in the middle of a system they didn't understand, pressing buttons without knowing which ones were wired to what. This wasn't sabotage, This was their own arrogance tripping over itself. I'd left everything running, exactly as it always had. I hadn't broken a thing. They did that all by themselves. But the part that caught me off guard wasn't the system collapsing. It was who started asking questions. Lena messaged me. Not through company email this time. She found me on LinkedIn. "I know what you're doing," she wrote. "Or at least I hope it's you. Because if not, we're in way deeper trouble than I thought." I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't reply. Not right away, but it shook something loose in me. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She was just tired? Like me. Tired of watching good work get buried under bad management. Of seeing years of care and labor wiped out by PowerPoint executives with no skin in the game. I finally wrote back. Just one line. I didn't break it. I just stopped holding it together. No reply, but I didn't need one. That night, I sat in my apartment, lights low, laptop humming softly beside me. I had access to everything. Could have ended it all with one command, wiped critical paths, triggered a silent shutdown. But that would have made me no better than Dan. And that's never what this was about. This wasn't revenge. It was reflection. They built nothing. They respected nothing. And now they were paying for it, not because I acted, but because they never understood what I'd been protecting them from. The system was speaking now. And no one at the top knew how to listen. By Thursday, they were calling it a crisis. Systems were limping. The dev team was overclocked and out of their depth. Finance couldn't reconcile accounts for the board report. HR couldn't onboard new hires because half their workflows were caught in loops. Dan finally scheduled an emergency all-hands Zoom. I wasn't invited, of course, but a copy of the meeting transcript landed in my inbox. Another artifact of the quiet surveillance net I'd built. Not out of paranoia, but because people forget that digital systems never really forget. Dan opened with spin. "We're experiencing temporary disruptions due to technical debt from prior configurations." Prior configurations. That was me. Kevin tried to speak, but you could tell he was tired. His confidence was cracking. He knew this wasn't a code bug. It was design unraveling. And then Lena spoke. She wasn't loud, but her voice cut through. "Maybe if we hadn't let go of the person who built this place, we wouldn't be in this mess." No one replied. That's when I knew I was done. Not just with the company, but with it. With being the ghost, the fixer in the shadows, the guy who silently absorbed chaos so others could pretend the system worked on its own. I'd done it for 10 years, and they proved they never really saw it. Or me. That night, I logged in one last time. Not to sabotage, not to save them. I rewrote the root access protocol, stripped my own credentials from the core, burned the master key from existence, archived the last personal backup of the system, and encrypted it with a passphrase no one would ever guess. I walked myself out of the digital building like I should have been walked out of the physical one, with a nod and no one watching. Then I opened a blank shell and typed a command I had written months ago during a weekend maintenance cycle, final mark purge. Confirm. I didn't press enter, because I didn't need to. They were already feeling what life was like without me holding the weight. That was the point. I didn't want destruction. I wanted silence. Absence. The invisible work finally making itself known through its disappearance. I closed the laptop, looked around my apartment, small, quiet, but mine. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a piece of code waiting to be executed. I felt clear, like a system finally free of bad input. The next day, I took a walk by the lake, left my phone at home, let the wind off the water hit me like a reset command. Dan will scramble. Kevin might learn. The system will probably recover, eventually. Or maybe it'll get sold, repackaged, renamed. That's not my concern anymore. They fired me. But in doing so, they finally had to learn what it meant to live without the man who knew the master password.